we've been going through a sequence of halachot, of decisions, where Beit Shammai say one thing, Beit Hillel say something else. Generally, Beit Shammai are strict and Beit Hillel are lenient. And the sages decide according to Beit Hillel, and perhaps there's a third opinion at the end. That's been the pattern for pretty much the first chapter and a half of the Mishnah Beytzah. And we're now going to conclude this pattern, but we're going to change it. It is focused on groups of three. And it's very interesting that somehow the Mishnah of Beytzah seems to be, it seems to have some literary patterns to it, but these patterns change as we go through the Mishnah. So let's try to pay attention as we go through this part of the Mishnah, and we'll see how the patterns change. So how do we know we're changing to a group of three? Well, first of all, we begin shlosha dvarim in three things. But these three things are going to be effectively this is the boundary Mishnah, the finishing off of the discussion of Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai, and then the beginning of a new sets of threes. Shlosha dvarim Rabban Gamliel machmir kedivrei Beit Shammai. There are three places where Rabban Gamliel was actually strict, like the words of Beit Shammai. In other words, he followed Beit Shammai strictly, rather than Beit Hillel, as we do. And by the way, the sages will follow Beit Hillel almost always. So Rabban Gamliel is outvoted by his sages. Very interesting example, maybe for governance of government today, actually, that the head of the Beit Din is outvoted by the sages. So what are these three things? We don't cover up hot food on Yom Tov to keep it hot on Shabbat. We don't stand up a lamp on a festival. I think this is a lamp that's fallen over. We don't pick it up and stand it up again. And we don't bake thick loaves, but only thin loaves. Rikikin are basically sort of thin matzah-style cakes. And Rabban Gamliel, he makes a point. Amar Rabban Gamliel, mi mehem. Mi mehen shel beit Abba lo hayu ofin petin geritzin ele rikikin. In all their days, my father's house never baked large loaves, but only wafer-thin cakes. So that's his practice. And Rabban Gamliel, by the way, often differs from the established halacha. So, for example, when he's in mourning, he takes a bath. And we don't take the sages ask him why, and he says, "Oh well, I'm very delicate. I'm very tender. That's why I have to take a bath even in the 7 days after I'm in mourning. I'm in Avel for 7 days. I'm going to take a bath. I'm just a very delicate person." But no one disputes that the halacha doesn't allow it. But that's what he does. And it's with this kind of sort of attitude that the sages respond to him. Amrulo, they said to him, Ma na'aseh levet avicha, what can we do with regard to your father's house? Shehayu machmir al atzman, but they were strict in respect to themselves. But, and here's the punchline, U'makilin l'chol Yisrael, but they were lenient towards all of the rest of the people of Israel. Liot ofin pitin geritzin ve'chori. They were lenient towards all the rest of the people of Israel to let them bake both large loaves and even these are charcoal roasted loaves. So in other words, the people of Israel did not follow the practice of Rabban Gamliel. And I think this is probably the sense of the beginning of the Mishnah. Shlosha dvarim Rabban Gamliel machmir kedivrei Beit Shammai. In these three cases, Rabban Gamliel was strict, like the words of Beit Shammai. Maybe the suggestion here is that he does not expect the rest of the people of Israel to follow him. This is his particular practice. Now we're going to follow the rule of three. We've now changed from Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai to the rule of three. He also made three lenient decisions. And these were forbidden. Again, the sages did not agree. V'chabdin bein hamitot. So one sweeps out between the couches. Now, lechabed means to honor somebody, but it seems to mean, and Jastrow will justify this, in quite a few places, it's used to mean to tidy up, to sweep out. Somehow you honor the room by sweeping it out. And the sages will forbid you to sweep out because you may basically fill holes. You may fill holes in the ground. You may actually alter the ground structure by sweeping up. Remember, they had dirt floors in those days. But Rabban Gamliel, maybe he has a stone floor, by the way. Rabban Gamliel will sweep up between the couches. So we're gonna eat Roman style, reclining, and the crumbs are going to fall on the ground between the couches. And after the meal, in Rabban Gamliel's house, they're going to sweep up between the couches. V'chabdin bein hamitot. So he's going to sweep between the couches. Umanichin et hamugmar b'yom tov. They put a mugmar on a festival. A mugmar is a kind of a collection of spices which you put on the fire in order to make your house smell really lovely. And of course, we know that you can cook on Yom Tov. And we learned 2 Mishnayot ago that you can use a fire to warm yourself up on Yom Tov. So we're using the fire to heat a human, and we're using a fire to heat food. But it seems that the sages will not allow us to use a fire to make the house smell nice. It's not kind of personal, it's not personal warmth, and it's not food, even though the spices in principle are food, although Rabban Gamliel would do this in his house. And they'd roast a kid whole on the night of Passover. Now, this is after the destruction. This is not the Pesach offering. This is after the destruction. And when you roast a kid whole, I mean, this is how they would roast it on Pesach, but we don't roast after the destruction of the temple. We don't roast a kid whole because it looks like it looks like we're celebrating Pesach, but outside the temple, outside the structure of the temple. So the sages forbid. V'chachamim osrin, and the sages forbid. Let's have some more threes. Shlosha dvarim Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah matir v'chachamim osrin. In 3 cases, 3 things Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah permits, and the sages forbid. You see, we're in this pattern. There are 3 things, Shlosha dvarim, and the sages are going to forbid. Parator, and these, by the way, are not necessarily to do with Beytzah or to do with Yom Tov. So we're just going off on a track of triple halachot. The paratoyot saberitzoa sheben karneha, his cow used to go out with a strap which she had between her horns. We actually learned this Mishnah on Shabbat. This is referring to an animal going out on Shabbat. Of course, the animal can't work on Shabbat. The Shabbat is a rest for your animals and your slaves as much as it is for you. So the animal can't work on Shabbat. But Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah apparently had this cow that used to go out with straps on its horns. Maybe it wasn't his cow. Maybe the Gemara in Shabbat says, well, maybe it was his neighbor's cow, but he didn't protest. That's why it was attributed to him as if it was his cow. It seems pretty clear from the Mishnah in Beytzah it was his cow. And the sages did not agree. What else did he do? You can curry cattle on a festival. This is a curry is a kind of fierce steel or metal comb that you use to kind of you use to comb out knots in animals' fur. And of course, it's a really tough metal comb, and you can make a cut in the animal as you're currying it. And we're not gonna slash the animal on Yom Tov. So the sage will forbid it. And one may grind pepper in its own mill. And we've seen, of course, already from the discussion about grinding spices that grinding spices, the whole question of grinding spices is a question under debate on Yom Tov. Can you grind spices or not? Maybe you can grind them in the Beit Hillel rule that you can grind them in an ordinary mortar and pestle because you need them fresh. The commentators on this Mishnah say we're talking about a domestic pepper mill where the sages might permit, or a big commercial one where Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah would permit, but the sages would forbid. Rabbi Yehuda says, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Ein mekardin et habehema b'yom tov mipnei she'oseh chubura aval mekatzrefin. Rabbi Yehuda says, look, you wouldn't curry your cattle on a festival because it would cause a wound, but you comb them, use a different kind of implement. V'chachamim omrim, Ein mekardin af lo mekatzrefin. We don't curry them, we don't comb them. We're not going to do this kind of work on Yom Tov. What is it about this pepper mill? And very interestingly, the Mishnah now brings another rule of 3, which I couldn't resist bringing just because it goes with the previous Mishnah, even though this is more than the normal quantity we deal with in one shiur. Harechaim shel pilpel t'me'ah mishum shlosha chelim. The pepper mill is susceptible to impurity. In other words, it can be made impure because of 3 kelim, 3 utensils. And remember, we've already learned that anything defined as a kli is a finished object, basically. Anything which is a finished object, a kli, is receptive to tumah. In other words, if it comes into contact with a dead body or a dead sheretz, it becomes impure, and we can't put food into it. We certainly can't put food into it if a kohen is going to subsequently eat the food, or if we want to be in a state of tahara. So why is the pepper mill going to be receptive to tumah? Well, it seems like there are 3 different parts in the pepper mill, each one of which could be mekabel tumah, could be susceptible to becoming unclean. Mishum kli kibul, the first one is the receptacle. And this seems to be a wooden receptacle at the bottom of the pepper mill, but it could be metal as well. When we finish grinding our pepper, it's going to fall in the bottom of the mill, and there's going to be some kind of little cup underneath to catch the pepper. So that's, if it's a receptacle, and it's finished with clearly a kli, right? It's just like any other dish. So it must be susceptible to uncleanness. Umishum kli matachot. There's some metal kli. There's some metal utensil in it. This must be the grinder. There's a metal grinder which is grinding this pepper away. And because it's a finished off metal object, it's a kli. It's susceptible to uncleanness. Umishum kli kavara, and also because of a sifter kli. And why the sifter kli does receive tumah is not really quite clear. Perhaps because the things, maybe it's a receptacle, maybe because things sit in it, or maybe because it's a bit like a cloth. And of course, a cloth garment can be made tameh. So we're not quite sure why, but it's very interesting that the Mishnah is going to continue with its rule of 3, and we will see a little bit more of these patterns as we continue the end of the chapter and the beginning of the next one.